Yo, how's it going, everybody? In today's video, I have our Season 1 Sorcerer 1 to 50 guide build. This build is going to be focusing on basically purely codex rolls on all of our gear in terms of aspects and just everything that you can get your hands on early on to make your life a lot easier. And this build will evolve over time, so we're going to be changing out some skills and stuff as we go, but I have that all laid out in our progression plan. And also I will have the whole written build over on our website. So if you guys want to check that out, there will be a link in the description down below. But let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and jump right into this Season 1 Sorcerer. So to start off, the main skills that we're going to be using with this build is going to be Flame Shield, Teleport, Frost Nova, Unstable Currents, Arc Lash, and Chain Lightning, and eventually Ball Lightning. So I just have Chain Lightning here to start. And then once you guys are able to get your hands on the gravitational aspect for Ball Lightning, that's when you will swap over to this. And that is actually going to be a codex roll this season. If you guys do the seasonal challenge book thing, I think it's like tier 4 from there, you get to the gravitational aspect. So make sure you guys focus on that. It's going to help you out a ton swapping over to the final version of the build. But until you get there, run Chain Lightning. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual skill tree. This skill tree is going to be basically what you end up at level 50, and you guys will be building towards that. I'll point out what things you should kind of spec into first as we go. But moving on down, we're going to be maxing out our Arc Lash, and then obviously grabbing Glinting Arc Lash for the cooldowns. And we're going to be using Firebolt as one of our enchantments. We can get Devouring Blaze active on everybody. And then Chain Lightning is going to be spec'd into regardless, at least in the final version, so we can get to the extra crackling energies. Before you guys move over to Ball Lightning, this is obviously going to be maxed out because it's going to be one of your primary damage dealers. And then our other enchantment that we use is going to be Ice Shards, and then we're going to be grabbing Enhanced Ice Shards so they can ricochet off those frozen enemies. And then that is actually going to allow us to get the extra stacking damage on one of our best Malignant Hearts this season, where we deal increased damage for each unique element that we have damaged with. So that's going to be covering the ice part. Obviously, we have no trouble with the electrocution part. And then Firebolt is going to handle all of the fire. So that's how you get those 3. And then in defensive skills, when you guys get there as you're leveling up, start into Frost Nova first so you can get the vulnerable damage going. This is really our only source of vulnerable, so that's why that's our main priority. And then from there you can go into Teleport and Glass Cannon, and then finally, like, you won't need Flame Shield for a while, especially if you don't have the aspect where you walk through enemies and they're immobilized. That's the main point of Flame Shield. Obviously the immunity is really nice for our survivability and moving through enemies, but Flame Shield is going to be the last thing you grab in this tree. Otherwise, max out Glass Cannon and move down. And as you guys are leveling, you're actually going to kind of skip the Conjuration tree at first. You don't need any of the Lightning Spear or protection stuff. That's going to be all survivability later on once you're in like the 40 to 50 level range. And then from there, you guys are going to focus straight into Devouring Blaze. So we obviously have a use for our Firebolt enchantment. That way we can get the extra crit damage against them. And then we can also move into our Unstable Currents as our ult. You don't have to max that out right away. Basically, you're going to want to be grabbing that, and then also Coursing Currents. We can get the increased critical strike chance. And then from there, before you guys reach your key passive, you're going to want to try to grab Invigorating Conduit. When you guys are using your Chain Lightnings and eventually your Ball Lightnings, you're going to be making a ton of crackling energies, and that's going to be our big source of mana sustain until we get into our Paragon boards into like the 50s plus range. So that's why we have that. It's really going to help you guys out spam your mana consuming skills. And then from there, our key passive is going to be Overflowing Energy, so we can spam our shock skills more, mainly our Unstable Currents. It also really helps with the teleports. That way you guys can be moving from group to group quicker and just clearing content faster. And then from there, that's where I start grabbing the survivability nodes like Electrocution, so they deal less damage. That's where I grab Protection, spec into Lightning Spear for the stuns and the crowd control. And then, like I said, with Flame Shield. Because then, by then, you guys are going to have all of the main aspects that you need for that, for the most part, at least the Flame Shield one. That's what I usually throw on my boots. And then from there, once you guys get the gravitational aspect, like I said, is where you're going to fully swap from Chain Lightning to Ball Lightning here. So this is our final skill tree for the build, but like I said, basically your Ball Lightning points are going to be into Chain Lightning until you get gravitational aspect. Really quick, I just wanted to mention our leveling path for this build. I was kind of mentioning it as we went through the skill tree, but this is roughly what I did as we went along. There's going to be a lot of like specking, unspecking, changing some skills around as we go, but let's just run through it super fast. Arc Lash, and then our Chain Lightnings. And then once we get it to our defensive node, we're going to be grabbing our Mystical Frost Nova for the vulnerable. And then we can grab just the base version of Teleport, Glass Cannon. And then I grabbed Ice Blades just for the Malignant Heart, where we deal unique element types and get that increased damage. That's going to be our ice version for the time being, because sadly, Frost Nova does not work for it because it doesn't do damage. It just freezes them and makes them vulnerable. And then once we get to 15 and get that first enchantment slot is where we're going to be grabbing Firebolt, finishing out Glass Cannon, doing a little bit of Arc Lash till we get to our Mastery Tree, and we can grab a Devouring Blaze to make Firebolt actually worthwhile. Then we get that increased critical strike damage on all of the enemies that we're damaging. Then we're going to be maxing out Arc Lash, just as it's our most consistent source of damage. We don't have to rely on mana for it, which is usually the tough part of early game Sorcerer. Then Unstable Currents as our ultimate once we unlock that. Coursing Currents for our increased critical strike chance. You don't have a lot of crit chance early on, so having 3% per hit of your shock skills is going to be very helpful for getting those extra crits and damage out. And then from there, we can actually swap over to our other version of Chain Lightning so we can get the Crackling Energy now that we're critting more, and then go straight into Absorbing Crackling Energy, grants mana. That's going to solve a lot of your early game mana issues and allow you to spam more and more Chain Lightnings and eventually Ball Lightnings once we get to the gravitational aspect. And that's why I start gearing up for that and grabbing Wizard's Ball Lightning here. This is still going to be active during our Unstable Currents even when you have Chain Lightning. So it is nice to have that and get extra Crackling Energies during our ultimate. And then from here is where I started to need a little bit more survivability. So I went Lightning Spear for our stuns while we're in our ultimate, basically. Then maxing out our Unstable Currents so our Crackling Energy can stay. And then we're going to be moving down into all of our other Chain Lightnings, maxing that out. I did forget to mention, this is where we're grabbing our key passive at 35 is Overflowing Energy. So that's why I did go into the end version of our Unstable Currents a little bit later, just so we can keep that up and get into our next ultimate slightly quicker. Then a little bit more survivability with Protection down here because we're spamming our cooldowns a little bit more so we can get those barriers. Maxing out our Teleports, Electrocution so enemies deal less damage when we hit them with our shock skills, which is helpful. And then from here is where you're basically going to swap over from our Chain Lightning to Ball Lightning. You should have the gravitational aspect around 50 just because you can get it for free by doing the seasonal booklet challenges. So swapping over to that, and then I make sure I have Ice Shards as our enchantments for dealing that unique damage type. Also, it's just free ad clear because they'll automatically do it when you do your Frost Novas. So that's where I got rid of Ice Blades, spec'd out of Chain Lightning, and went into Flame Shield. Now let's start taking a look at the aspects that we're slowly going to be adding to this build as you guys are leveling up. And like I said, a lot of these are Codex rolls, including Gravitational Aspect here. So the main ones you're really going to want to focus on are going to be Aspect of Control. You're going to put that on your first decent amulet and just kind of live with that for the time being. Obviously, you can always replace it since it is the Codex roll. And then Gravitational Aspect and Prodigies is what you're going to be putting on your rings because you replace those the least. Your weapon and offhand, you're going to be replacing those constantly as you guys are getting better and better gear. So those you're going to be putting aspects on a little bit less frequently. And Conceded Aspect is a random drop, so you don't really have to worry about that one for the time being. I still actually don't even have one, funny enough, and I'm like almost level 70 now. But the other Codex roll that you're going to be putting on your gear is going to be Retribution, where you deal increased damage to stun enemies. Sadly, that did get nerfed pretty hard this patch, but it is still a really good overall damage source. And then another one that you can be using, another Codex roll, is going to be Basic Skills gain increased attack speed. That way we can get more Unstable Current procs going when that's active as you guys are spamming your Arc Lashes. Disobedience is another Codex roll for your armor for a little bit of survivability. So once things start getting tough, find a decent piece of armor to throw this on. And then you guys can also put on the damage reduction after hitting an enemy with the basic skill. And then a random drop, but something that I do get quite often, so I do feel comfortable putting it in fairly early on, is the Frost Blitz aspect. That way we can get the additional charge of our Frost Nova and just have more options to proc vulnerable on enemies and also stagger bosses a little bit quicker. So you guys can replace this for another survivability until you have that. And then another random drop, which I do get fairly often, is the one for our flame shield, which will immobilize them and allow us to utilize our devouring blaze a little bit better. But the main ones that you have to focus on, and really the only ones that I use, are the 3 that I have on my amulet and 2 rings. And then obviously the retribution over here is helpful when you can equip that. Now for our malignant hearts this season, the main one that you're going to want to have at all times, you guys can get this incredibly early on if you just focus on doing the first little bit of the seasonal quest line, is the heart where you deal increased damage for all the unique elements that you damage with. So that's why we are using the Ice Shards enchantment. Like I said, that's going to deal our ice. Firebolt is going to deal our fire, and we have all of our shock skills to proc that. And the really cool part is, with this heart, is once you have done all the unique elements, you can just deal 1 damage type and it'll keep resetting the whole stack. So your starting combo will obviously proc all of these. And then as long as you're just hitting something with like Arc Lash, like you don't even have to use a skill, it will stay at the 3 stacks and you guys can get to that like 30% plus X damage, which is very helpful. And like I said, it's incredibly easy to find this and just keep it on one of your pieces of jewelry. Then as you move on, you guys can use the suppressing incoming damage. Also, you can do the critical strikes, electrocute the enemy and chain that lightning around. But then the big thing, and something that I'm using now later on, is once you guys get to the barber, that's going to go on a piece of gear and your damage is just going to skyrocket. This heart is broken. Don't worry about it through the first 50 levels, but it is, I guarantee you, something that we're going to be using from 50 plus. So just keep an eye out for that. And like I said, focus on that seasonal quest line and you guys can get a pretty good chance at obtaining this heart. Yeah, for the 5 other people out there who are playing Sorcerer this season, this is what I think is the best 1 to 50 leveling build for our Sorcerer. Like I said, usually the big limiting factor on this character is your mana, and Shock has just the best early game mana efficiency. So that's why we're going to be running that. And I think it just works very well. And obviously you can transition that straight into endgame. That was one of my favorite builds in Season 0, was our Ball Lightning build. So you can continue this on further, and it's currently what I'm doing now this season. So if you guys are interested in that build, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I should hopefully have that out tomorrow or the day after. So keep an eye out for that. Like I said, there will be a written version of this leveling guide over on our website, dpscheck.gg. So hopefully you guys want to keep that up as you guys are leveling through your game. But anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. See ya.